Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a fascinating psychological framework that uncovers the invisible, everyday conversational habits that accurately reveal a person's true mental capacity. We live in a world that is just completely obsessed with standardized tests and big vocabulary words as the ultimate measures of a person's intelligence. But the material we're exploring today argues something totally different. Real cognitive ability? It's actually hidden in plain sight.
Think about your own interactions for just a second. Have you ever completely exhausted your mental energy trying to explain something incredibly simple to someone, only to slowly realize they weren't even trying to understand you, right? You probably looked at them and wondered, what in the world is actually happening inside their mind right now?
Well, society tells us to look at test scores, but today we're going to expose 7 undeniable behavioral traits that research highlights as clear markers of lower cognitive ability. And recognizing these exact psychological patterns is an absolute game changer. It will literally save you countless hours of pointless frustration. So let's get right into it.
Let's start with Section 1, Internal Processing Errors. Basically, how a limited mind shrinks the universe. There is this profound contrast in how different minds view the world. The very first trait of lower cognitive ability is an absolute refusal to see complex gray areas. You see, true intelligence requires the ability to hold opposing ideas in your mind at the exact same time. But processing that multi-layered, nuanced information, that takes massive internal mental energy. So a brain with lower processing power instinctively protects itself from getting exhausted by aggressively oversimplifying the universe. Whenever you hear someone constantly throwing around extreme, absolute words like always, never, everyone, or nobody, you are witnessing a mind that is desperately trying to shrink a complicated reality into easily digestible pieces.
And, this inability to see nuance naturally breeds our second trait, an overwhelming sense of unearned confidence. There's this famous piece of research from Cornell University that brilliantly demonstrates this. It shows that individuals who score in the lowest percentiles on tests of logic and grammar consistently overestimate their own performance. They literally lack the cognitive skills required to recognize their own glaring incompetence. It's wild. Smart individuals maintain a healthy dose of self-doubt because they know exactly how much they don't know. But lower cognitive ability? It breeds absolute certainty. So when you see someone fiercely confident about a complex topic they clearly know nothing about, you're looking at a fundamental blind spot in their brain's self-evaluation. Moving a bit deeper, the third deeply ingrained trait is the complete inability to separate personal emotion from objective reality. For a highly developed mind, facts are always going to dictate feelings. If the established facts change, a smart mind just updates its understanding to match that new reality. But for someone operating with lower intelligence, that entire process is completely reversed. Their temporary feelings dictate permanent facts. Their whole worldview is built on a foundation of emotional comfort. If a new idea makes them feel good, boom, they declare it true. If an uncomfortable truth makes them feel insecure, they simply declare it a lie. Okay, let's move on to Section 2, the conversation battlefield. This is where volume takes precedence over substance, and hostility meets new information. This brings us to trait number 4. The desperate need to physically dominate conversations through sheer volume and endless repetition. This totally goes against what society often tells us about intelligence, and honestly, it's the biggest reason simple disagreements escalate into total chaos. Watch how predictably this unfolds. Because they lack the intellectual depth to form a well-reasoned counter-argument, they automatically rely on raw aggression. They aggressively repeat their original point, they dramatically pump up the volume, and they treat the human conversation not as a way to reach mutual understanding, but as a brutal battlefield where they just have to violently defend their fragile ego. They're operating on this primitive belief that whoever speaks the loudest is the ultimate winner. And that builds right into our 5th trait, a deeply ingrained hostility toward any new information. It's such a revealing contrast. Think about it like this. An intelligent, adaptable mind treats its beliefs exactly like computer software. When a more accurate update comes along, the old system is seamlessly overwritten. No big deal. However, a person with significantly lower intelligence treats their personal beliefs like a permanent tattoo. Because their identity is so closely tied to the very few things they think they already know, any new evidence that contradicts their narrow worldview is instantly treated as a severe personal attack. They will rapidly invent wildly illogical excuses to dismiss proven facts rather than doing the hard work of actually changing their mind. Let's look at the aftermath in Section 3, blind spots and feedback failures, the total breakdown of cause and effect. So, trait 6 outlines a massive breakdown in the basic understanding of cause and effect. This is the complete inability to accurately visualize the long-term consequences of a current action. People with lower cognitive abilities struggle deeply with abstract thinking. They really only react to what is immediately placed directly in front of their face. They simply can't play the complex mental chess game of thinking 3 or 4 steps ahead. For example, they might make a totally impulsive decision 3 weeks ago, but when they are drowning in bad situations today, they are completely unable to trace the current disaster back to their own actions. Actually, they also frequently confuse simple correlation with actual causation. And that brings us to the 7th and final trait, the absolute paralyzing inability to handle any form of constructive feedback. Look, true personal growth requires bravely looking at your own flaws completely objectively. But when baseline cognitive capacity is low, the human ego becomes dangerously fragile. Any gentle attempt to correct their behavior, even if you do it with the absolute utmost kindness, is immediately perceived as a vicious, humiliating attack. They just can't separate their core worth as a human being from their flawed performance on a specific task. So instead of calmly listening and adjusting, what do? They immediately deflect all responsibility, they loudly play the victim, or they just launch an aggressive counterattack. Which leads us perfectly into Section 4, protecting your mental energy and knowing when to just walk away. So, what does this all mean for us? The crucial point here is that fully understanding these 7 behavioral traits is absolutely not about walking around the world with some toxic sense of superiority. Not at all. Instead, this explainer is entirely about self-preservation. It is about carefully protecting your own precious peace of mind. When you finally realize that the intensely frustrating person you're arguing with simply does not possess the required mental hardware to process your logical perspective, you can finally stop wasting your valuable time. You can peacefully let go of all that anger that comes from falsely expecting rational behavior from an irrational source. By correctly recognizing these psychological patterns, you completely empower yourself. You conserve your limited emotional energy by learning the true hallmark of intelligence, knowing exactly when to speak your mind, knowing when to sit back and quietly listen, and, most importantly, knowing exactly when to simply walk away. This framework allows you to silently navigate our incredibly complex world with a much, much deeper understanding of human nature. I want to leave you with this final, really powerful thought to reflect on the next time you find yourself getting dragged into a pointless, exhausting debate. The whole problem with the world is that fools and fanatics are always so certain of themselves. So, the next time someone raises their volume instead of their logic, ask yourself, are you trying to reason with a tattoo? Protect your peace. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and I'll catch you in the next one.